everybody. It's a privilege to speak on a platform with such distinguished fellow speakers. I am, though, sympathetic to the audience. I'm reminded of the last occasion where I was the last speaker at the end of 8 speakers, and it was a long time ago when I was a student at university, and a packed hall of commerce students were not as polite as I suspect you are today. They were really bored, and they decided to throw paper planes at me, which was a bit intimidating, and I was wondering what to do until one came straight for me. So I caught it and threw it right back at this fellow, and that sort of seemed to quieten everyone down. So if anyone feels the inclination at this point in the proceedings to do something unusual, I'm prepared. I'm delighted to speak here today, but I thought I would start by perhaps making myself rather unpopular and saying that I am not a romantic about women or how if we had more women doing this or that, they would change the world. I think it's important to remember in South Africa, many other places, but certainly here, that some of the worst cabinet ministers that we have had in the last 15 years have been women. So I would like to inject an element of realism into this, but I would like to be absolutely clear that I am strongly in favor of making sure that there's absolutely no discrimination against women, against girls and their mothers in rural and urban South Africa. And there's no doubt that if we educate girls and if we offer much more employment to women, we can change the future of millions and millions of people. I believe that South Africa is at somewhat of a crossroads in many respects. I think it's important at this time to recognize the achievements we have made, and there have been significant ones. We need to ensure a balanced perspective on our country, but nonetheless, there are some very important issues that confront us all. And I think there are big choices ahead if we are to become the country that we all want South Africa to be. An important global report came out in 2008. It was called the Commission on Growth and Development, and its members were politicians, civil servants, and academics of international repute. Its aim was to identify some of the distinctive characteristics of the 13 developing countries that grew at more than 7% per annum for over 25 years. The Commission suggested ways in which other developing countries could learn from the successful performance of these outstanding countries. And one of the most important conclusions was this: economic growth does not just happen. It has to be consciously chosen as an overarching goal by a country's leadership. In the fast-growing economies, policymakers understood that successful development entails a decades-long commitment and a fundamental bargain between the present and the future. Now, good governance requires a vision of South Africa that transcends narrow party political or other sectional interests. The national interest must trump the special interests that I think are holding South Africa back. With this in mind, in the time available, let me look at a few policy issues of vital importance. Miriam Altman has spoken about unemployment and jobs, so I will deal with that very quickly and move on to others. South Africa's staggeringly high unemployment, especially among young people, is a massive challenge. The prognosis is grim. Youth unemployment is extensive, it's dangerously entrenched, and can only get worse if the economy does not expand in a job-intensive way. The official unemployment rate for people between the ages of 15 and 24 is almost 24% higher than the rate for the population as a whole. In almost every year of this decade, more than half of the young people who were actively looking for work could not find employment. Johannesburg is the motor of economic growth in South Africa, yet 56% of males in the 18 to 24 age group and 65% of young women in the same age group were unemployed in 2005. And it's got worse since then. We did some research about a few years ago in Polokwane, and I was stunned to discover that if you're something like 18 to 30 and a young woman, that group is about 88% unemployed. Think about that for a moment. Think about communities with those sorts of unemployment rates. And that's it. You won't get a job after the age of 30 if you've never worked. I believe that the essential economic policy priority must be to encourage the creation of job-intensive economic growth, and that every other economic goal and policy should be tested by whether it helps to create jobs. And I'm not talking about make-work jobs. I'm talking about economically viable employment. And if policies impede that, we should dump them. The truth is, we can fantasize about high-tech, high-skill kinds of economies, but we need to create jobs for the people we have now. And the vast majority of them have bad schooling, they have no or little experience of the workforce, and they're unemployed. Converting our massive unemployment problem into a low-wage problem would be an important step forward, especially if it was coupled with fast growth that would soon start to push wages up. We should remove all but the most basic minimum regulatory barriers in the way of employers willing to start enterprises that need South Africa's mostly unskilled workers. We should consider using age-related subsidies and exemptions to encourage employers to hire more unemployed, inexperienced young people. I want to support the Minister of Finance and the Treasury in their call for such a wage subsidy for new young workers. Now, dealing with unemployment is one example where vision and political courage is required. We have to ensure that the national interest in many more jobs overrides minority sectional interests who perpetuate a status quo where labor insiders effectively write the rules of the labor market and keep outsiders from ever getting any jobs at all. Let me move to another issue, and I didn't know the minister would be here. I'm delighted that she is. I should say this is a ministry with which my organization has had a lot of contact since the new minister came into power, and we've been delighted with the relationship we have established with the Director General. And the minister has a very big challenge. The South African schooling system is a struggling one. Something like 75 to 80% of our schools are dysfunctional. Pupils perform abysmally in international tests. We generally feature last in performance with respect to maths, science, and functional basic literacy. Pupils in grade 6 are performing at grade 3 levels. The system is incredibly wasteful, with the vast majority of those entering schools not completing their education or going on to useful jobs. This has devastating consequences for the individuals concerned and for the country's prospects. Our economic growth cannot accelerate without vastly more people getting a decent education. Inequality and racial divisions are perpetuated and exacerbated by the abysmal quality of schooling available to poorer people. I think we have to confront the failures of the education system, which traps people into generation after generation of poverty and deprivation, and fails to deliver more of the workers we need. Let me say something about a report that my organization released this week, and I think this is fascinating information and important to the education debate. I'm talking here about private schools for the poor, or low-fee private schools. We have done on-the-ground research where we sent teams of researchers to walk the streets of 6 regions in the country: Braamfontein and Daveyton in Gauteng, Giyani and Malumuleli in Limpopo, Butterworth and Kofemvaba Tsomo in the Eastern Cape. And what we did was we mapped the public and the private schools in those communities. We found that in those 6 areas, some 30% of the schools were private, where parents are paying about 650 rand per month for 10 months for their kids to attend these schools. And this is in communities where the average fee for the public school is 104 rand per month, and if you include the no-fee schools, it comes down to 50 rand a month. So parents are voting with their feet and paying their own money. We interviewed over 170 parents, many of whom are teachers in the public schools. Now, private schools are smaller than public schools as a generalization, but we came across amazing schools. Some that looked like formal schools, a public school, some that were in abandoned factories or shacks in the back of people's houses. They're very different. What is interesting is that the quality of schooling is equal to or better than the local equivalent public school. So it's a very big area, and I think it's an important development. These schools are growing very fast. We don't know if this will continue, but if they do, this has significant implications for policy. Let me raise just one. Why do we have free schools? Does it? What parents were telling us, and I will illustrate this in a moment, let me read from an Indian experience I thought you would find interesting. This is a famous report about India and about education in India, and it just struck me as very similar to South Africa.